Welcome to Not2 Reads, an audio library of revolutionary texts. Interview with Chairman Gonzalo. Conducted by El Diario. Part 5. International Politics. El Diario. Chairman, let's talk now about international politics. Since communism is your goal, how do you see the conditions for world revolution? And what problems do the communists have to resolve? Chairman Gonzalo. We start from the understanding that revolution is the main trend, and this continues to be so. This trend, put forward by Mao, continues to develop. In our view, there has been no stability since World War II, not even relative stability. The whole world has been shaken by great revolutionary storms. They've come in waves, of course, but it couldn't be any other way. We hold that there are three fundamental contradictions in the overall situation that is unfolding. The first and principal contradiction is between the oppressed nations on one side and the imperialist superpowers and other imperialist powers on the other. Although it may be redundant, we prefer to list them this way for the sake of clarity. This contradiction is resolved through democratic revolution, through People's War. A second fundamental contradiction is the one between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. This is resolved through socialist revolutions and proletarian cultural revolutions, but also through People's War, bearing in mind, I repeat, the type of revolution and the specific conditions of each country. A third contradiction is the inter-imperialist one, between the superpowers, between the imperialist superpowers and the imperialist powers, and among the imperialist powers themselves. These contradictions among them are resolved through aggression and imperialist wars, and tend toward defining who will have world hegemony through a Third World War. Why do we put the contradictions in this order? Because we consider this to be their order of importance. We insist that this contradiction, between the oppressed nations on the one side and the imperialist superpowers and imperialist powers on the other, is principal and of great importance for the world revolution. It has to do, in our opinion, with the weight of the masses in history. It is obvious that the great majority of the masses who inhabit the earth live in the oppressed nations. It is also evident that their population is increasing 4 times as rapidly as the population of the imperialist countries. We apply the principle that the masses are the makers of history, and we take into account the fact that World War II caused the masses to stand up politically, something that even reactionary US analysts recognize. We think that should the inter-imperialist contradiction generate a world war, it would be a new inter-imperialist war for world hegemony and redivision of the world, and therefore it would be to divide up the spoils of war, and the spoils are the oppressed nations. They would therefore have to proceed to occupy our countries in order to rule us. And so, once again, the contradiction between the oppressed powers on one side and the imperialist superpowers and imperialist powers on the other would become principal. We firmly believe in this, and it is not because of chauvinism or of being, as some say, inhabitants of oppressed countries or nations. It is not. This is the trend that can be seen in history, and this is the weight of the masses in history. And, moreover, facts continue to demonstrate that where imperialism is more and more being defeated and undermined is in the struggles that are being waged in the oppressed nations. Those are irrefutable facts. Therefore, we consider this principal contradiction to be of great importance, and think that it is going to be decisive in eliminating imperialism and reaction from the face of the earth, provided that Marxism-Leninism-Maoism is put in command of the world revolution, that communist parties develop based on this ideology, and that they take up People's War again, in accordance with the type of revolution and the specific conditions. This is the way we understand the great importance of the principal contradiction that we uphold. There are some who don't agree and think that what's really going on is that we don't believe in revolution in the imperialist countries. We believe that these revolutions are a historical necessity, and that the development of the principal contradiction provides them with more favorable conditions, and that even a world war will provide more favorable conditions for them to make revolution. And revolution will be made because it is a necessity. In the end, the two great forces, the two great revolutions, the democratic revolution and the socialist revolution, must converge so that revolution may triumph in the world. Otherwise, it would not be possible to eliminate imperialism and reaction from the whole planet. That's what we think. The question poses itself. What is the key point? It is Marxism-Leninism-Maoism, because it is a question of having a correct ideological and political line, and you can't have a correct political line unless you have the correct ideology. For that reason, we think that the key to everything is ideology. Marxism-Leninism-Maoism, principally Maoism. Secondly, the development of communist parties. Why? Because the masses thirst for revolution. The masses are ready and crying out for revolution. So the problem does not lie with them. The proletariat cries out for revolution. The oppressed nations, the peoples of the world, cry out for revolution. So, we need to develop communist parties. The rest, I repeat, will be done by the masses. They are the makers of history, and they will sweep imperialism and world reaction away with People's War. El Diario. What role is U.S. imperialism playing in the world? What do you think of Star Wars? What do you think of the so-called disarmament plans of the US, USSR, and other European countries?
Chairman Gonzalo. In sum, U.S. imperialism arose after World War II as the gendarme of world reaction. But later, it entered into a contest for world hegemony with social imperialism. Thus, both of them make big plans to win hegemony. The issue of Star Wars, or the Strategic Defense Initiative, which is its official name, is related to this. The U.S. government, particularly with Reagan, has started to elaborate big strategic plans that encompass decades of the next century. That is, they are thinking of their survival and how to maintain hegemony and defeat social imperialism. Within this, Star Wars is nothing but a plan that seeks to deploy a shield that would prevent missiles with atomic warheads from reaching their cities, and in turn, allow them to protect themselves if they carry out an atomic attack against social imperialism. But these are only plans and wishes, because up against one plan is another. Not long ago, the Soviets retaliated by saying that there were ways to overcome this would-be shield, and consequently, the supposed invulnerability of the US would not exist. As to the issue of disarmament plans between the superpowers, the US and the USSR, we have to start from what Marxism, as well as our own founder, teaches us. The more they talk of peace, the more they prepare for war. A lot of empty talk, a lot of deceptive demagoguery is being made in relation to the disarmament agreements they've signed for the withdrawal of medium-range missiles from Europe. What is being disarmed is the missile, that is the vehicle, but they keep the warhead in order to use it for whatever suits them. That is the essence of the farce. The European powers are obviously in the line of fire of both superpowers, and if there is a world war, they would like to prevent it from taking place in Europe. That's what they want, because at the bottom they are eager, as is Japan, that the two tigers fight each other so that later one of them can emerge as a great power, as the supreme ruler. Such are the dreams of Japan, West Germany, etc. But a world war would also be waged in Europe, and the two superpowers are very aware of the Europeans' desires. So the situation creates contradictions among the powers and the superpowers, which unfolds as a complex process involving collusion and contention. It could not be otherwise. How these powers fight to fulfill their dreams is also evident. Japan for dominance over Asia and South America, Europe over Africa and Latin America. And they don't restrict themselves to these regions, hence they're bustling about in mediations, their separate and conflicting policies, because they each defend their own interests. We believe that these are all demagogic debates that only serve to conceal big plans involving contention for world hegemony. That is what we believe, because imperialism will not cease to exist until we sweep it away. Its essence won't change. Its essence is to exploit and to oppress, to reduce nations to the state of semi-colonies, and, if possible, to colonies. While I'm on the subject, it's high time that we go back to using these terms, because they are terms specifically established by Lenin. But the point is that in the face of these plans, the main thing is not simply exposing them, but getting prepared to take them on. And there is but one way to prepare, and that is by means of people's war. Chairman Mao said, "We have to prepare ourselves, and prepare ourselves right now against an imperialist war, and principally against a nuclear war." How will we respond? Only with people's war, and no other way. That is the most important thing. Exposing them is part of carrying out a propaganda campaign that shows the world their sinister and hideous plans for mass genocide. But this will never stop a war, as Stalin clearly stated. These campaigns never stop wars, so the only thing to do if we want to prevent the war is to develop revolution. As the chairman taught us, either revolution will prevent world war, or world war will give rise to revolution. This, I believe, is how we should view the situation. El Diario. Chairman, what do you think about the Soviet state? Lately, they've been talking a great deal about perestroika. How do you see this question? What is your opinion of the attacks on Stalin? Chairman Gonzalo. Lately, the subject of perestroika has been bandied about. Perestroika, as far as I have been able to see, because I think it is necessary to study it carefully and understand all the revisionist filth it contains, is part of this new offensive of modern revisionism that we communists are facing. Gorbachev is thoroughly revisionist, a revisionist from head to toe. He claims that the 20th Congress of the CPSU was a historical event of enormous importance in the USSR. That was the fateful Congress in which the dictatorship of the proletariat was attacked under the pretext of attacking Stalin. He admires Khrushchev and portrays him as a great man, bold, determined, whose problem, he says, was that he fell into subjectivism, that he didn't elaborate correct plans, but overly ambitious plans that couldn't be carried out. Khrushchev was Gorbachev's teacher, and Gorbachev learned lessons from him, as well as from his other teacher, Brezhnev, even though he would like to distance himself from Brezhnev. We have to focus on a key question with regard to perestroika. Gorbachev himself says that perestroika may be defined in many ways, but if we focus on, quote, the key that expresses its essence most accurately, then we can say this: perestroika is a revolution, end quote. But there are those who don't see it that way. We have to pay very close attention to this. It is not a revolution, but a development of the counter-revolution, a more unrestrained unfolding of capitalist restoration aimed at eliminating what little remains that might serve the proletariat and people in combating social imperialism. He says it is a revolution because it proposes an acceleration in the socio-economic sphere, a radical change, and an advance to a new type of state. What would the new type of state be? A more shamelessly bourgeois state, structured in a new way that they have not yet found a way to define, because it has not yet been defined, not even in their most recent conference. So Gorbachev is completely unabashed. That's why it is useful to call attention to this term, because it is generally said that, quote, perestroika is restructuring, end quote, period. But Gorbachev says that the term that corresponds perfectly is revolution, and that is a mockery, an irony, an outrageous joke. What else does this individual put forward? He is developing Khrushchev's positions. Let's look at the question of war. He says that a world war will lead to the disappearance of humanity. In his own words, quote, in this war, there will be neither victor nor vanquished. There will be no survivors, end quote. Quote, if a nuclear war breaks out, all living things will be obliterated from the face of the earth, end quote. And, quote, in a global nuclear conflict, there will be neither winners nor losers. World civilization will inevitably perish, end quote. But what does he add? Allow me to read, quote, politics must be based on realities, and today the most formidable world reality is the vast military arsenals, conventional as well as nuclear, of the United States and the Soviet Union. This gives our two countries a special responsibility in relationship to the whole world, end quote. What is this? Unabashedly, he is telling us that his might is based on military superiority, and he brandishes it alongside the military power of Yankee imperialism, clamoring that they are all that matters in the world, and as a result, we are dependent on them. This is what he espouses, the most shameless, blatant superpower politics that we have ever seen. But according to him, it is not only a nuclear war that puts humanity at risk, but conventional war as well. Given the sophisticated and deadly weapons that exist today, it could bring the same results. Thus, Gorbachev tries to impose on us the most monstrous policy of subjugation. Faced with this, we raise even higher Chairman Mao Zedong's banner, quote, "It's right to rebel," end quote. This high Russian official's revisionist intentions lead him to propose a new thought. Listen clearly, a new thought that, quote, takes into consideration, beyond ideologies and differences, the highest interests of humanity, end quote. What happened to the formal mention of a class viewpoint? Isn't this a revival on a higher level of Khrushchev's preachings? Clearly it is. And an essential part of this thought is that war is no longer the continuation of politics by military means. In his own words, quote, Clausewitz's maxim that, quote, war is the continuation of politics by other means, end quote, which was classic in its time, now turns out to be ever more desperately outdated. It is destined for the libraries, end quote. But this thesis was upheld by Lenin and reiterated by Chairman Mao in this century, and it is key in the military theory of the proletariat, and we are guided by it in the People's War. Thus, Gorbachev clashes openly with Lenin, as did Khrushchev. And the so-called new conditions that lead to the revision of Marxist principles is an old story that has been used since the days of the old-style revisionists, so it shouldn't serve as any type of comfort to this new revisionist standard-bearer, according to whom, quote, so much the better that in the West, just as in the East, new thoughts and new men are emerging, men who are beginning to see how they can reach agreement, because cooperation is the only thing possible, end quote. But we say that this collusion between the two superpowers goes on so long as the conditions have not yet emerged for fighting a third world war, if we do not sweep them away first. That is the essence of things, and I believe that it is necessary to point out clearly how Gorbachev, who perversely opposes Lenin, is so brazen in his deceit that he calls himself a, quote, follower of Lenin, end quote, who is bringing about a, quote, return to Lenin, end quote, and, quote, has learned a lot from Lenin, end quote. This is what he tells us, and I believe these things are very corrosive. On the other hand, after he advocates, quote, basing international politics on moral and ethical norms common to the whole human race, end quote, Gorbachev says, quote, what will happen to the military-industrial complex, they ask. To begin with, each job in the military-industrial complex costs 2 or 3 times more than in civilian industry. In place of 1, we could create 3 jobs. In the second place, the present military sectors of the economy are connected with the civilian economy, and they do a lot to help it. This is a starting point to using their potential for peaceful purposes. In the third place, the Soviet Union and the United States could carry out extensive joint programs, pooling resources and scientific and intellectual know-how to resolve the most diverse problems for the benefit of humanity, end quote. Thus, he swaggers like Khrushchev and opposes Lenin's conception of imperialism and its economic process. Here also, as in everything, he is anti-Leninist, as is clear from his positions, similar to Deng's, separating the party from the state and promoting economic growth more and more in the service of the bourgeoisie and imperialism. Like the other imperialists, the social imperialist Gorbachev proposes to combat so-called terrorism. He commits himself to this and to the use of the United Nations for this purpose as well. Finally, I think something deserves to be said about how he sees Latin America, and Nicaragua in particular. In Nicaragua, he thinks that because a dictatorship, that of Somoza, was overthrown by a popular revolution, this proves the correctness of the outlook that has guided and still guides the Nicaraguan revolution. This is extremely revealing. Concerning Latin America, his view is that the Soviets have no interest in disrupting the empire, or, as they say, the relations between the US and Latin America. This concerns us directly. What do the social imperialists of the USSR want? They are in a stage of trying to see how to resolve urgent problems. It is a moment when collusion is principal, so they look to contain or cool off points of conflict in order to devote themselves to the development of their economic systems, while they continue making big plans to contend for world hegemony. Collusion is temporary. Conflict and struggle are absolute. In conclusion, perestroika is a perverse plan to continue with the modern revisionism that Khrushchev initiated. It is a new counter-revolutionary offensive of revisionism. In regard to the attacks on Stalin, Khrushchev attacked him, and so does Gorbachev. But Gorbachev has gone even farther, rehabilitating those whom Stalin condemned. One of the things that should really make one think is the rehabilitation of Bukharin, as well as others. They've even recognized his status as a party member. You have to ask yourself, who's left? Only Trotsky. Now he's the only one left. The attack on Stalin remains, as it has been, a pretext for deepening capitalist restoration, developing political plans to wipe out anything that may remain, and that might be of some service to the people and once again making revolution. That is their dream, but it will amount to nothing but a dream, pure and simple. Concerning Comrade Stalin, the revisionists say a lot about him and attack him. What is deplorable is that others do the same, accusing him of all kinds of errors and maligning him. We believe that Comrade Stalin was a great Marxist-Leninist. What Chairman Mao said about him is correct. His errors amounted to 30%, and the root of these errors was in his limitations in grasping dialectics. But no one can deny that he was a great Marxist. The attacks on Stalin by Gorbachev and his henchmen should make others, who claim to be communists and who also attack and denigrate Comrade Stalin, think. They should really think about these coincidences. There is something important behind these attacks. El Diario. How do you see the present leaders of China? Are they in the counter-revolutionary camp? What is the way out for the Chinese people? Chairman Gonzalo. The present leadership of China is revisionist, and is really led by a perverse character, an old and rotten revisionist, Deng Xiaoping. During the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, he was thoroughly exposed, and the world saw what he was and continues to be, an out-and-out revisionist, a lackey of Liu Xiaoqi. It's Deng who is leading China, once a socialist country, in a rapid and all-out restoration of capitalism. It is pertinent to point out that positions espoused by Gorbachev were previously espoused by Deng, in accordance with his own conditions. What camp are they in? China acts like a world power. This is the political road they are following, one of collusion and struggle with powers and superpowers. Their dream is to be a superpower in the next century. That's their dream. The way out of this, as in other cases, is revolution, people's war. Let's remember that Chairman Mao, towards the end of his brilliant life, said to Comrade Jiang Qing that she could carry the flag of revolution to the summit, pointing out to her, if you fail, you will fall, your body will shatter, your bones will break, and then, once again, guerrilla war will have to be waged. He gave us the answer. It's part of a poem. I don't remember the text very well, but that's the basic idea. The central point here is that guerrilla war will have to be waged again, people's war. El Diario. Chairman, do you think there are socialist countries in the world today? Chairman Gonzalo. Frankly, no, I don't think so. There are those who believe, for example, that Albania is a socialist country. I'd say to those who believe that Albania is a socialist country that they should study carefully, for example, the documents of the 8th Congress of the Party of Labor of Albania. That would be a good thing to study, because it says there that the center of world reaction is US imperialism. And Soviet imperialism? What happened to the two enemies we have to fight? It was always just words. With Hoxha himself, it was just words, because he always wrote more about fighting Yankee imperialism than social imperialism. The same Congress also said that humanity has never been closer to its extinction than now. They repeat this just like the others, which is no mere coincidence. But what do they propose that we do? Concretely, expose imperialism. That is not the solution. Exposing imperialism will not stop a world war. The solution is to make revolution by carrying out people's war. And if one looks at everything that is said there about the serious economic problems they have, one can see quite clearly the road that Albania has taken. However, it was not Ramiz Alia, the present leader, who chose this road, but Hoxha himself, who, in 1978, in a speech before the electorate, stated that in Albania there were no antagonistic classes. We know very well what that means, because this question has been thoroughly explained by Chairman Mao Zedong. And if we add to this his deceitful attacks on Chairman Mao on the development of Marxism, what is he but a revisionist? Therefore, Albania is not socialist. If we look at Vietnam, the road it is following is that of an instrument of the Soviet Union that today clamors for imperialist aid with an economy in crisis and ruin. So much blood. For what? It's because there was Ho Chi Minh, a centrist, as can be seen in his famous testament, where he says he regrets seeing conflict within the international communist movement, when the question was which side he would take in the struggle between Marxism and revisionism. A communist has but one solution, to stand on the side of Marxism. Ho Chi Minh never did. Later came Le Duan, a rotten revisionist. Hence, the present situation in Vietnam. This is why I hold that there are no socialist countries today. All this makes one reflect seriously and come to understand the problem of restoration and counter-restoration. It's not a question that calls for lamenting or whining, as some try to promote. The point is to confront reality and understand it. And we can understand it if we grasp the question of restoration and counter-restoration that Lenin himself had put forward and that Chairman Mao masterfully developed. Historically, no new class has established itself in power all at once. Power was seized and lost, re-seized and lost again, until, in the midst of great contests and struggles, that class was able to win and hold power. The same thing is happening with the proletariat, but we've been left with great lessons, including in socialist construction. And so, it has been a monumental experience. In the final analysis, it is an historical process, and what we must be concerned about is how to prevent the restoration of capitalism. And every revolution that is in progress must think, as we've been taught, about the long years ahead, the long years to come, and be confident that the process of development for the proletariat in seizing power and establishing the dictatorship of the proletariat and defending it in leading the revolution has already been defined. There have already been great historical milestones achieved in this process, and so the prospects are that our class, learning its lessons, will seize power and establish the dictatorship of the proletariat throughout the world, and the proletariat will not be overthrown anymore, but will continue along this road of transformation until the state is brought to an end when we enter communism. El Diario. Chairman, with the triumph of the revolution, what kind of international relations will the new state have with the bourgeois governments, especially with the Yankee state and with social imperialism? Chairman Gonzalo.
The situation is clear. We must put an end to the domination of Yankee imperialism over our country. At the same time, we must prevent the social imperialists from introducing their domination, as well as warding off domination by any other power. In synthesis, that's the answer to your question. El Diario. Chairman, wouldn't the danger of total isolation put the new state in a precarious position? Chairman Gonzalo. We believe the following: that we must keep to the path that will lead us to the emancipation of our class, the path that will take us to communism. And this path demands that we maintain our independence, so as to fulfill the interests of the proletariat in the world revolution. We believe, as is known, that there are disputes and contradictions among the imperialists, and these can be made use of, for example, to acquire certain resources. Since the market is getting tighter and tighter, and there is a real trade war, we may find those who will sell to us. Of course, they will demand an exorbitant price, and, as Lenin said, we will pay them with our curses. But at the same time, there are oppressed nations, revolutions in progress. There's the international proletariat. There are the people throughout the world and communist parties. They will help us, and we will have to learn, because based on proletarian internationalism, they will respond to our call and they will be well received. We are already seeing how ties between backward countries have been initiated, even how barter is used. We will find the appropriate forms. We have not studied this question sufficiently, because it involves problems that will pose themselves in the future. We have general guidelines, but we agree with what Lenin said. You want to know what war is like? Wage it. And let us have inexhaustible confidence in the international proletariat, in the oppressed nations, in the people of the world, and most particularly in the communists, in the parties and organizations, whatever their level of development. Holding fast to our ideology, Marxism-Leninism-Maoism, we will advance, even if we begin by feeling our way in the dark, finding temporary solutions for certain situations or for brief periods of time until we find the definitive one. As Lenin taught us, no revolution can be planned out completely ahead of time. And many times, it must grope its way forward uncertainly, finding temporary or momentary solutions, but that's how it advances. This is our approach, because our fundamental weapon is our ideology. We take what Marx said as our starting point. How easy it would be to undertake a revolution if we were absolutely certain of winning and having the whole problem resolved. It would be easy, but revolution is not like that. The question is to commit ourselves to it and carry it forward, no matter what the cost. Since the masses are the makers of history, our people will rise to the occasion, and since it falls to us to arm them with the overall weapon Marx has given us, then we will defend our state by force of arms, because no revolutionary state can maintain itself on the good graces of imperialism and reaction. And in this way, with this firmness, with this determination, with the conviction that Marxism-Leninism-Maoism, principally Maoism, gives us, we will find the way, and we will find new roads. Chairman Mao has taught us that we must think in new ways and generate new forms. This is a fundamental question. He laid out that, in economic matters, the question comes down to a clear political line, organizational forms, and great efforts. In regard to all problems, especially those we face that have not yet been resolved, we begin with a firm Maoist conviction that while there are communist parties and masses, all manner of miracles will be achieved. El Diario. How does the PCP see proletarian internationalism today and in the future? Chairman Gonzalo. First of all, we see it as a principle, a very important principle, because, as I'll say again, the proletariat is an international class, and we communists are internationalists, because in no other way can we serve communism. Our party has always been concerned with training its members, its fighters, and the masses in proletarian internationalism, concerned with educating them in Marxism-Leninism-Maoism, to serve the world revolution and to fight untiringly and unswervingly so that communism may flower on earth. For a time, we lost our links with other parties. Later on, those ties were re-established, and we are contributing and struggling for the international communist movement, which is why we are members of the Revolutionary Internationalist Movement, which we consider to be a step in the regrouping of the genuine communists. We think that this is a complex task, because if it is complex and difficult to form a party and carry it forward, how much more complex will it be to struggle so that the communists, through their different parties and organizations, can unite? We know that this is an enormous but indispensable task. We believe there are those who concur, who struggle, and who are struggling, with all the limitations we might have, to see that proletarian internationalism may again bring together the communists in the world to struggle jointly for the realization of our final goal. We understand that the problem is extremely complex and difficult, but we communists are made for this kind of task. El Diario. How do you, Chairman Gonzalo, analyze the different struggles being waged today in the oppressed nations? How do you analyze the armed actions in Europe and the various national movements? Chairman Gonzalo. There are numerous struggles in the oppressed nations. There are struggles in Africa, in Latin America, and in Asia, a region of such importance and weight in the world. Asia always serves our very special attention because of the weight of the masses in history, and because of what Marxism itself has taught us. We think that the problem with the struggles in the oppressed nations lies in the lack of, or insufficient development of, the communist parties. Yes, some parties really are going to have to make a great contribution. We believe, on the other hand, that the question is that people's wars are not being developed. Consequently, we see the need to persevere in contributing to putting Marxism-Leninism-Maoism in command of the world revolution, so on that basis powerful parties can be formed and lead people's wars. We see this as the biggest limitation. There are nationalist movements in the Middle East, Palestine concretely, in South Africa, etc. But we believe that these revolutions, in order to really follow the path opened up by the new era initiated by the October Revolution, must develop communist parties, because without them, the revolution cannot go all the way. Africa has given us several examples of this. In Algeria, for example, there was an armed struggle, and a very fierce one, but socialism was never built, because they had no communist party to lead a real revolutionary struggle. Without communist parties, nationalist movements develop that seek simply to be recognized as nations, in order to change from being colonies to being semi-colonies, while remaining dependent on imperialism, or, in other cases, changing masters. We have seen this in various movements tied to England and France, for example. In other cases, armed struggles are developed that the United Nations resolves, deciding what will happen, like in Cyprus. So the point is not simply waging armed struggle. The heart of the matter is people's war, a communist party, and Marxism-Leninism-Maoism. Nevertheless, all these movements give strength to the struggle against imperialism, but they will only serve to completely wipe it out if they are led by a communist party waging a people's war. As for the armed actions in Europe, we've seen protracted armed struggles. They are an expression of objective reality. Therefore, the task is not to condemn them, but to understand, study, and analyze them to see how they are an expression of the fact that there is also a revolutionary situation in old Europe. And beyond that, there are those who have taken up arms, understanding that this is the only way to seize power. This is a powerful blow to revisionism, because in Europe itself, considered to be one of their bastions, revisionism is beginning to be abandoned. Regardless of the level reached, and the problems that remain to be solved, this is undeniably an important advance. In some cases, the national question is involved, as in Ireland. In other cases, the issue of how to make the revolution is raised. We believe that these struggles must be studied seriously. The problem is in understanding what their ideology is, what politics guides them, what class they serve, and how they approach the question of the superpowers. We believe that they deserve a lot of attention, especially when there are organizations that propose taking up Mao Zedong again, or that are starting to raise the need for a party, or that the armed struggle alone is not enough. We must look at this as a new awakening and understand that they might make a lot of mistakes. When you get right down to it, who doesn't? But they themselves will sum up lessons from their errors, as they are doing. They'll advance, grasp Marxism-Leninism-Maoism, and form parties and wage people's war in accordance with the socialist character of their revolution and in accordance with their specific conditions. In sum, to repeat, it is proof that in Europe too, there is a revolutionary situation developing unevenly. There are people who are sick and tired of rotten revisionism who, in such difficult conditions, within the belly of imperialism, where the struggle is complex and difficult, are taking up arms to change the world, which is the only way it can be done. This provides more hope and helps us see that the main trend is revolution, and to see how Europe is also turning toward revolution. Let's also recognize that, after having been pioneers in the past, they are opening up a path, and, in the end, providing more hope. And they deserve greater understanding from us, since there are already those who are concerned about the party and are taking up Mao Zedong again. That is, they want to return to Marxism and to grasp it completely as Marxism-Leninism-Maoism. These struggles being waged in Europe also have their limitations and errors, as all struggles do, but we should see them as an expression of the irrepressible advance of revolution, and how more and more countries and peoples are coming forward to take up arms to overthrow the existing order. They're summing up experience and setting their course toward the party and the ideology of the proletariat, Marxism-Leninism-Maoism, principally Maoism. For me, seeing revolution begin to open a path in Europe is a reason to rejoice. And regardless of possibly stumbling and falling along the way, we must have confidence in the masses and in the peoples. Confidence that, as in other places, they will make revolution with arms in hand, following Marxism. They will do it there as well. This is how we must think. I emphasize that we must see this in historical perspective, take a long-term view, study these movements seriously, and encourage everything that tends towards Marxism-Leninism-Maoism, forging a party, and developing people's war. El Diario. What is your opinion of Nicaragua and Cuba? Chairman Gonzalo. I would like to state what I said once when I was talking about these problems with some friends. Nicaragua carried out an incomplete revolution, and their problem is that they didn't destroy the power of the whole big bourgeoisie. They focused on being anti-Somoza. I believe that is one problem. A democratic revolution must wipe out the three mountains, and in Nicaragua, that has not been done. Another thing is that the revolution has developed within the Cuban framework, readjusted in recent years. And this simply leads, in the end, to dependence on the Soviet Union. How can we prove this? Because the fate of Nicaragua, like Afghanistan or the Middle East, is discussed, manipulated, and dealt with in conversations between representatives of the two superpowers. The moves and countermoves they have made are indicative. The measures that are adopted in Nicaragua with regard to the Contras coincide closely with meetings and agreements between the superpowers. We believe that Nicaragua, in order to follow the correct path that the heroic Nicaraguan people certainly deserve, must develop the democratic revolution completely, and this demands a people's war. They must break with dependence on the Soviet Union, take their destiny in their own hands, and defend their independent class interests. This requires a party which, of course, adopts a proletarian outlook. Otherwise, they will, lamentably, continue being a pawn. We believe that the Nicaraguan people have demonstrated a great fighting spirit, and their historic destiny can lie nowhere but in developing the revolution as it must be developed, with a party based on Marxism-Leninism-Maoism and People's War, developing independently without the tutelage of any power, whether it be a nearby or distant one. About Cuba, I can only say this concretely. They play a role in the service of the Soviet Union, not only in Latin America, but also in Angola, for example, and in other places. Cuba changed hands from one master to another by a process that the Cubans themselves call exceptional. One must recall clearly the basis that they laid out to guide their struggle, that there is no clear differentiation of classes, and what is needed, in sum, is a collection of saviors to redeem the oppressed. We've seen this along with the 4 following points in documents that are circulating in Peru. The problem here is not taking the class struggle as their starting point, quote, socialist revolution or a caricature of revolution, end quote, which means upholding a one-stage revolution in the oppressed countries. A united front of 3 classes without the national bourgeoisie. No need for a Communist Party, which means dismissing the leadership of the proletariat. And the rejection of people's war, starting with rejecting the need for base areas. These ill-fated principles are propagated by the Cubans. Cuba has a big responsibility in America, because it provided hope. But we must remember very clearly what happened in 1970. Fidel Castro said that the strategy of armed struggle had failed, and he sought to abandon what he had encouraged and supported. Douglas Bravo confronted him, countering that the strategy had not failed, but Castro's tactics had. But, unfortunately, later Bravo chose to accept amnesty. We believe all of this has generated a lot of problems in the Americas, but today, these same criteria, readjusted to the dictates of the social imperialist master, are being propagated and presented as a new revolutionary development being applied concretely in Nicaragua. This is false. What we must and do affirm is that Latin America is, and has been, ripe for people's war, and that is its road. Latin America has an important role to play. Let's not forget that it's, quote, the US's backyard, end quote, according to the arrogant Yankee imperialists. Latin America also has an importance for the world which it will realize if it grasps the ideology of the proletariat, Marxism-Leninism-Maoism, principally Maoism, forges communist parties, and carries forward people's wars as part of the world revolution. We Latin Americans will number over 500 million at the end of this century. There is much that unites us, and we must work together because of this closeness, which doesn't mean that we can detach ourselves from the world revolution, because we can only carry out our task as part of the world revolution. Latin America is not enough. Communism for the whole world or for no one. El Diario. What is the Communist Party of Peru's contribution to the world revolution? Chairman Gonzalo. Our main contribution is to uphold Maoism as the third, new, and higher stage of Marxism, committing ourselves to help put this ideology in command of the world revolution, and as part of this, to demonstrate the validity and all-encompassing perspective of Maoism. Also, to demonstrate that if one sustains oneself by relying on one's own efforts, maintaining independence from the superpowers or any other imperialist power, it is possible to make revolution, and what's more, it is necessary to do it that way. And to demonstrate the power of people's war, which makes itself felt despite all our limitations. And, if possible, to provide, as some have said, hope, which implies responsibility, to be a beacon for the world revolution, an example that can serve other communists. In this way, we are serving the world revolution. Other points. El Diario. Chairman, we have come to the end of this interview. We've been talking with you for more than 12 hours. Now, we'd like to talk about you personally, about Dr. Abimael Guzmán Reynoso. Was there anyone among your family or friends who influenced you in the development of your vocation and ability in politics? Chairman Gonzalo. I'd say that what has most influenced me to take up politics has been the struggle of the people. I saw the fighting spirit of the people during the uprising in Arequipa in 1950, how the masses fought with uncontainable fury in response to the barbarous slaughter of the youth. And I saw how they fought the army, forcing them to retreat to their barracks, and how forces had to be brought in from other places in order to crush the people. This is an event that, I'd say, has been imprinted quite vividly in my memory. Because there, after having come to understand Lenin, I understood how the people, how our class, when they take to the streets in March, can make the reactionaries tremble, despite all their power. Another thing was the struggles of 1956, when the people fought, while others betrayed them. Well, that is what the opportunists and reactionaries do, but the people fought and carried the day, and there were mass movements, powerful ones. These events, for example, helped me understand the power of the masses, that they make history. I also had the occasion, going back a little further now, to see the uprising in Callao in 1948, to see with my own eyes the people's courage, how the people were brimming with heroism, and how the leadership betrayed them. And going back even further in my memory, I believe that World War II affected me profoundly. Yes, I remember, if that's possible, not very clearly, but as if in a dream, when the war began in September of 1939. The uproar and the news on the old radios. I remember the bombing, the important news. I remember the end of the war too, and how it was celebrated with the blasts of ships' horns, loudspeakers, a great clamor and happiness because World War II had ended. I had a chance to see the so-called Big Five in the newspapers, and Comrade Stalin was among them. So I'd say that these events left their mark on me, and impressed upon me in an elemental and confused way the idea of power, of the masses, and of the capacity of war to transform things. All these things exerted an influence on me. I believe that, like every communist, I am the child of the class struggle and of the party. El Diario. At what age did you take up Marxism? Were you still in school, or were you at the university? Chairman Gonzalo. My interest in politics began to develop at the end of high school, based on the events of 1950. In the following years, I remember forming a group with my schoolmates to study political ideas. We were very eager to study all kinds of political ideas. You can probably understand what kind of period that was. That was the beginning for me. Then, in college, the struggle at the university, I experienced firsthand big strikes, confrontations between apristas and communists, and debates. And so my interest in books was sparked. Someone saw fit to lend me one. I believe it was 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I liked it. I began to study Marxist books. Then, the figure of Comrade Stalin made a big impression on me. At that time, people who were drawn to communism and those who became party members were trained using problems of Leninism. It was our mainstay, and I studied it as it deserved to be studied, seriously, given its importance. Stalin's life interested me. He was, for us, an example of revolution. I had problems getting into the Communist Party. They had an absurd policy. To become a member, you had to be the son or daughter of a worker, and I wasn't. But others had different criteria, and so I was able to join the party. I participated in the defense of Stalin. At that time, taking him away from us would have been like taking away our soul. In those days, the works of Stalin were more widely propagated than those of Lenin. That's what the times were like. Later, I made a trip to Ayacucho for work reasons. I thought it would be a short stay, but it lasted for years. I thought it would just be for a year, because that's what the arrangements were. I had my plans. The proletariat had others. The masses and the people change us in many ways. Ayacucho helped me discover the peasantry. At that time, Ayacucho was still a very small town, mainly countryside. If you go to the poor sections, even today, you find peasants there, and if you walk toward the outskirts, in 15 minutes, you're already in the countryside. There, too, I started to understand Chairman Mao Zedong. I advanced in understanding Marxism. The conflict between Marxism and revisionism has been very important in my development. Some unlucky soul lent me the famous Chinese letter, a proposal concerning the general line of the international communist movement. He lent it to me on the condition that I'd return it. Obviously, it was an understandable theft. The letter led me to get more deeply into the great struggle between Marxism and revisionism. I committed myself to work within the party and to wipe out revisionism, and I believe that together with other comrades, we achieved it. We gave up on 1 or 2 who were too far gone. They were dyed-in-the-wool revisionists. Ayacucho was of enormous importance for me. It has to do with the Revolutionary Road and Chairman Mao's teachings. So through this whole process, I was becoming a Marxist, and the party was molding me, resolutely and patiently, I believe. El Diario. Many people know that you've been to China. Did you ever meet Chairman Mao? Chairman Gonzalo. I was not that fortunate. I was only able to see him from a distance. But I saw the recognition and deep affection of the people for a great leader, an extraordinary Marxist, a pinnacle of Marxism. I didn't have the good fortune of meeting him, as I said. The delegation I belonged to made a lot of errors and demonstrated some foolish arrogance. I think that kept them from granting us that privilege. Yes, I've been to China. In China, I had the chance, which I'd like to see many have, of being in a school where politics was taught, from international questions to Marxist philosophy. They were masterful lessons given by proven and highly competent revolutionaries, great teachers. Among them, I can remember the teacher who taught us about open and secret work, a man who had devoted his whole life to the party, and only to the party, over the course of many years. A living example and an extraordinary teacher. He taught us many things, and he wanted to teach us more, but some didn't accept it. After all, there are all sorts of people in this life. Later, they taught us about military questions. But here they also began with politics, people's war, then forging the armed forces, strategy and tactics. And then the practical part that went with it, like ambushes, attacks, military movements, as well as how to assemble explosive devices. When we were handling delicate chemicals, they urged us to always keep our ideology first and foremost, because that would enable us to do anything, and do it well. We learned to make our first demolition charges. For me, it is an unforgettable example and experience, an important lesson, and a big step in my development, to have been trained in the highest school of Marxism the world has ever seen. Well, if you'd like an anecdote, here's one. When we were finishing the course on explosives, they told us that anything can explode. So, at the end of the course, we picked up a pen and blew it up, and when we took a seat, it blew up too. It was a kind of general fireworks display. These were perfectly calculated examples to show us that anything could be blown up if you figured out how to do it. We constantly asked, "How do you do this? How do you do that?" They would tell us, don't worry, you've already learned enough. Remember what the masses can do. They have inexhaustible ingenuity, and what we've taught you, the masses will do, and will teach you all over again. That is what they told us. That school contributed greatly to my development and helped me begin to gain an appreciation for Chairman Mao Zedong. Later, I studied some more, and I have tried to apply it. I think I still have a great deal to learn from Chairman Mao Zedong, from Maoism, as well as from Mao's practice. It isn't about trying to compare myself to him. It is simply using the highest pinnacles as a reference point for achieving our objectives. My stay in China was an unforgettable experience. I was there on another occasion as well, when the great proletarian cultural revolution was beginning. We asked them to explain what was then called Mao Zedong thought. They taught us some more, and that helped me understand more. A little more, I should say. One thing that seems ironic is that the more I understood Mao Zedong, the more I began to appreciate and value Mariátegui. Since Mao urged us to apply creatively, I went back and studied Mariátegui again, and saw that we had in him a first-rate Marxist-Leninist who had thoroughly analyzed our society. It seems ironic, but it's true. El Diario. How does it feel to be the man most wanted by the repressive forces of the government? Chairman Gonzalo. It feels like you're doing your job and working hard at it. What remains is to shoulder more responsibility for the revolution, the party, Marxism-Leninism-Maoism, for our class, the people, and the masses. And to always understand that we carry our lives on our fingertips. If that weren't so, we wouldn't be communists. So they have their reasons. Mine are those established by the party, to which I wish to be more and more true and useful, because life can become entangled anywhere along the road. Moreover, it has a beginning and an end. More time, less time. El Diario. Is there anything you're afraid of? Chairman Gonzalo. Fear? I believe that fear and lack of fear form a contradiction. The point is to take up our ideology and unleash the courage within us. It is our ideology that makes us brave, that gives us courage. In my opinion, no one is born brave. It is society, the class struggle, that makes people and communists courageous. The class struggle, the proletariat, the party, and our ideology. What could the greatest fear be? Death? As a materialist, I know that life will end someday. What is more important to me is to be an optimist, with the conviction that others will continue the work to which I am committed, and will carry it forward until they reach our final goal, communism. Because the fear that I could have is that no one would carry on, but that fear disappears when one has faith in the masses. I think that the worst fear, in the end, is not to have faith in the masses, to believe that you're indispensable, the center of the world. I think that's the worst fear, and if you are forged by the party, in proletarian ideology, in Maoism principally, you understand that the masses are the makers of history, that the party makes revolution, that the advance of history is certain, that revolution is the main trend, and then your fear vanishes. What remains is the satisfaction of contributing together with others to lay the foundation so that someday communism may shine and illuminate the entire earth. El Diario. What do you do when you're not busy with politics and the war? What books do you read? Chairman Gonzalo. Many times I don't have time to read what I'd like to. What do I like to read? I read a lot of biographies. I think that literature is a great form of artistic expression. For instance, I like to read Shakespeare, yes, and to study him. When you study Shakespeare, you find political issues. There are very clear lessons in Julius Caesar, for example, and in Macbeth. I like literature, but politics always wins out with me, and leads me to a book for the political significance, what is behind it. After all, behind every great artist, there is a political leader. There is a man of his time who is waging class struggle. I have also read Peruvian novels, and sometimes I reread them. I once read a short work by Thomas Mann about Moses. Afterwards, we used it to help us politically interpret a struggle in which we were involved at that time. One part of the work says that one can break the law but not reject it. How did I interpret this? To break the law is to go against Marxism, to deviate, to have wrong ideas. That is permissible, but one cannot allow Marxism to be rejected. I think it is possible to learn many things. I read Broad and Alien is the World, and All the Races, and I have studied them as well. I like literature and music. Before, I liked music more. Now, I enjoy it less. What other interests? I like science, books about science. In my early days at the university, I studied law because I had to have a profession. But I liked philosophy, and I devoted myself to it. Through philosophy, I discovered science. I spent a lot of time studying questions of mathematics and physics. In my opinion, physics is an extraordinary science. It is quite fitting to call it an adventure of the mind. The problem with science is that scientists, whose starting point is a materialist one, are good so long as they stay within the realm of science. But when they start to get into philosophy or other areas, if they are not materialists, they fall into idealism. This happened even with Einstein. I like science, I think it's extraordinary. This inclination for science can be seen in the thesis I wrote for my degree in philosophy. It is an analysis of time and space according to Kant, from a Marxist point of view, using mathematics and physics. I would like to read it again, because there's no time now to go back and study all that again, but I don't even have a copy. El Diario. Do you like poetry as well? Chairman Gonzalo. Yes, at one time I was surveying world poetry in an anthology, and I studied it before too. There were some works at the university library that I had access to. I like poetry. It is another one of the things I admire about Chairman Mao, who is an extraordinary poet. As to Peruvian poetry, for me, Vallejo. Yes, he is ours, and besides, he was a communist. El Diario. Some say that your speeches, The Flag and Initiate the Armed Struggle in 1980, are beautiful political poems of war. What do you say about that, Chairman? Chairman Gonzalo. I'd say that sometimes in politics, you have to let yourself go, so that the passion, the deep feelings, can strengthen our determination. At such times, so they say, the heart speaks, and I believe that the revolutionary passion which is indispensable for war expresses itself. What literary value it might have, I couldn't really say. El Diario. Do you ever get depressed? Chairman Gonzalo. No. I believe that I've gotten almost built-in optimism, and I occupy myself more with the problems of understanding and conviction than with problems of feeling or depression. On the contrary, I think I'm quite optimistic. It is Marxism, Chairman Mao, who has made us understand that people, especially communists, are optimists. Whenever I find myself in a difficult situation, I strive to look for its positive aspect, or for what potential for development may still exist within that situation, because nothing is completely black, nor is anything completely red. Even if there were to be a big defeat, even though we have not had one yet, there would always be a positive aspect. The point is to draw out the lessons, and continue to do our work based on the positive aspect. You'll always find someone to support you, to lend their ardent enthusiasm and assistance to the struggle, because communism unites people. El Diario. Do you have friends? Chairman Gonzalo. No, I don't. I have comrades, and I am very proud of having the comrades I have. El Diario. Chairman, we have reached the end of the interview. Chairman Gonzalo. We have worked very hard, and I thank you for your efforts. I very much appreciate the difficulties you've had to go through in order to meet with me and to be able to publish this first interview, which will reach the people through El Diario, a newspaper that has fought tenaciously to serve the people. Thank you very much. El Diario. Thank you, Chairman. Peru, July 1988.